Do you guys remember the old nursery rhyme that says Jack and Jill went up the hill to catch a pail of water? Jack fell down and lost the crown, then Jill came tumbling after him. Well, in researching this topic, I came across a very similar nursery rhyme involving Jack and Jill, but it's a little bit of a twist. It's Jack and Jill went up the hill to have sex with one another. Jill said yes, but her dad found out. Now Jack is spending time in prison. Very interesting, don't you think? But also in preparing for today's episode, I was checking out an old somebody rap group called City High. Do you guys remember them? They had a song called 15 Do 20. Now, I remember that song from back in the day, but I can't tell you at the time if I paid attention to the lyrics. Like most people, it was a nice beat, nice rhythm. You had an idea what it was talking about, but you're not really paid attention to the lyrics. Well, I listened to it this time, and boy, it was an eye-opener because it was really, really obvious. It was very plain, and I think, quite frankly, very well put together. And just on the side note, I think rappers are just some brilliant people. To be able to rap and create a story, that's just really cool to me. But that's not what we're here for. Anyway, the story that they talk about in 15 Do 20, it concerns two people, a young man. He was 18 years old, had just graduated from high school. According to the lyrics, he was following all the rules. And on this summer day, he saw this really nice looking lady. She was hot, dressed appropriately, even gave her body measurements. I mean, this woman was just fine in his mind. And he asked her name, but he never asked her age. And as the song keeps going, he talks about, hey, if I knew what I knew now, I would have left her alone because 15 gets you 20. And then later on in the song, they talk about a young lady who was a beauty queen. She was smart. She studied to get a degree. And one day on a hot day, she decided she got to go out and hang out with the Greeks. And she saw this fine, tall, dark, and handsome man on the yard. And man, oh man, he was gorgeous. And in her mind, he had to be grown as well. She didn't ask him his age. And just like the young man early in the song, her position was, if I had known what I know now, I would have left him alone because 15 gets you 20. Now, I've said two different things, and both are roughly about the same thing. Do you guys get what I'm trying to say? I hope so, and I hope you're interested. And if so, check it out on the other side.
It looks like you lost another one.
Welcome back to The Father's Advocate. I'm your host, Attorney Ella Hughes. I am going to take a moment away from discussing fathers' rights, and I want to talk about a topic that is very controversial, but not only that, but it disproportionately affects men than it do women, and that is the topic of statutory rape. Now, I want to talk about this because a few things. One thing is that a colleague and I were discussing this, and boy, we had a heated debate about this, and we're not going to go into a whole lot of details because we have done so on our podcast. We talk about the different schools of thoughts about the statutory rape, how different people see it, not only in this country, but also in other countries, how they view what's considered the age of consent. And if you're interested in learning more about the different school of thoughts, I invite you to listen to our podcast, which is The Father's Advocate, anywhere that you listen to podcasts. But for today's episode, my goal is to be able to educate young people, men and women, about the perils of engaging in relationships with young people who you think are our age, and they're not, because it's a possibility what turned out to be young puppy dog love could literally land you in prison. It is a topic that I find to be very serious and very, very unfair as in terms of how it is applied, particularly to young men. So before we get started, it is very important that you understand about crimes and how they apply. Then we can talk about statutory rape. First thing, crimes usually have two elements, and the elements is what's called mens rea and actus rea. Mens res concerns the mind, what you're thinking about, what were your intent, what was your belief, what was going on in your mind and your circumstances to make you do what you did. Actus reus concerns with whether or not you did the crime. So for instance, I did do this, I did take something, I did hit something. Mens reus was I intended to hit someone, I intended to take something. Now, the difference between a general crime and a statutory rape crime is that statutory rape is what's called a strict liability crime, which means you are guilty of the crime strictly because you committed the crime. It is not concerned about your mind. It does not concern about what you thought, what were the circumstances surrounding you, whether or not somebody lied to you about it. It doesn't count, and it doesn't care. At best, the only thing about the circumstances and how you engaged in this relationship with someone under the age of consent is that it could be used in mitigation. That is about it. So for instance, if you at a club and this is a club that's like 18 and over or 21 years or older, and you meet a young lady or you meet a young man and you start engaging in intimate relations, and for all intents and purposes, you have zero reason to believe that this person's not of age, because after all, to get into this club, you have to be a certain age. Well, you later on find out this person's 14 years old. You were not aware of that, but now you're looking at prison time. And in my opinion, it's just not fair. But let's talk about statutory rape more so. What is it? Statutory rape is the act of engaging in sexual intercourse with an individual under the age of consent. And the age of consent can vary depending on the states. In most states, the age of consent varied between the age of 15 and 17. And the state of Georgia, consent is 16 years old. What that means is that if you have intercourse with someone under the age of 16, you're looking at prison time. And the punishment for engaging in that type of behavior, oftentimes, more time than not, is a felony. In Georgia, if you're under the age of 21 years of old, you're looking at 1 year to 20 years in prison. If you're over the age of 21, you're looking at anywhere minimally 10 years to 20 years in prison. And in that particular category, there is a mandatory minimum of 10 years, and you must register as a sex offender for the rest of your life. There is a caveat to this, kind of like an exception, and that is called the Romeo and Juliet laws. Now, the unfortunate thing about this is that Romeo and Juliet law came about because of a really tragic and arguably racial case that happened right here in the great state of Georgia in Douglas County of a young man by the name of Janalo Wilson. And essentially, he was a young man, star athlete, had a lot of colleges vying for his attention and wanted him to be part of their program. He was a honor roll student, and I think he was also the homecoming king. He was doing wonderful. And this one night, he decided to hang out with some friends at a hotel, have, I guess, like a senior party right before graduation. And there were some young girls there, and they began to have intercourse. And this particular young lady, she actually started having oral sex, and it was videotaped. Now, Jalalo, he decided, I need to get back home. I got a curfew. I'm not going to get in trouble with mom. He goes back home, and a couple of weeks later, he gets arrested, not knowing what's happening. And what happened, it wasn't just him, it was several folks that got arrested because of their age, and the alleged victim, she was only 15. Janalo, however, was 17 years old, and there was a 2-year difference. Now, at the time, the law in Georgia said if teenagers who are in intimate relationships, if they're having sex and it's just a 3-year difference, then it will be a misdemeanor. However, if they engage in oral sex, it will be a felony. Everyone took a plea except Janalo. He actually decided, I'm not going to do that because he would be required to register as a sex offender. And before he went to trial, he had at least 4 charges. 2 of the charges had been dropped. And when he went to trial, the charge of rape had been found not guilty on that charge, but the charge of aggravated child molestation, he actually was convicted on that and got a sentence of 10 years. Now, the interesting thing about that is that every single person was under the belief that he did not deserve prison time. The other thing that was interesting is that it was only a 2-year difference between the two. The law they believed was wrong, but they had to follow the law. And then even the victim who initiated the act, she herself believed that it was something that he should not have to spend time with. Now, Delalo was sentenced to 10 years, and his attorney fought tirelessly. And what happened is that he was successful in getting the law overturned, making it a misdemeanor if young people actually engage in sexual activity, including oral sex. But the law was not retroactive. And I suspect that was the racial aspect of this very controversial case. He actually spent 2 or 3 years in prison. And because, again, of his attorney fighting tooth and nail and doing everything she can to get him out, the Supreme Court of Georgia finally decided that his punishment was cruel and unusual, and he was ordered to be immediately released. Because of him and his fight for justice, it created what is now known as the Romeo and Juliet law. And the Romeo and Juliet laws essentially says young people engaged in sexual activity is a misdemeanor, and you will not be required to actually register as a sex offender. Now, irrespective of whether or not you are charged as someone under the age of 21, someone over the age of 21, or if you are a young person close in age, still having sexual intercourse with someone under the age of consent, which is 16 in Georgia, then you are still guilty of statutory rape. The only difference is whether or not you're looking at a misdemeanor or a felony and how much time. So what are the defenses to statutory rape? Generally speaking, there are not a lot of defenses available to someone that is accused of statutory rape. And that is because statutory rape, again, is a strict liability crime. And so the only way to win or to refute statutory rape is, one, it didn't happen. So let's just say you're accused of statutory rape and you never had sex with the person. Well, obviously, if there's no sex and no intercourse, there is no crime. So when I mentioned earlier about remaining abstinence, that is one sure way that you will not be charged with statutory rape. You could possibly be accused of it, but to prove it and be convicted is a different story. Another way to use as a defense is that the alleged victim is actually the age of consent. So maybe the person said that they were 17 or 18 when you first met them, and you believed them, you engaged in intimate relations with this person, and then became a rumor that she or he is now only 14 or 15 years old. But after all the investigation has taken place, it turns out that the individual is of age. And then the last thing is marriage. But the thing is, the individual must be eligible to get married, which means they must be of an age, a legal age, to get married. Now, do you remember when I said the circumstances don't matter? Well, the only time that it does matter is for mitigation. So again, you could potentially looking at prison time, but in some states, because the alleged victim may have lied, the alleged victim's activity suggested that she or he was over the age of consent. Say, for instance, they were drinking alcohol, they had a fake ID, or they were in an environment where your age did matter. This is a 21 and older club. Sometimes that can help mitigate the circumstances, which helps with punishment. So instead of looking at prison time, maybe you'll get what's called probation. Now, what is it that you can take away from today's episode? Because after all, the goal is to provide education. Well, first thing is to practice abstinence. Now, I get it. That's not a reality for a lot of people. It's not realistic. But that is one sure way to avoid being charged with statutory rape. The second thing, and most importantly, don't believe everything that somebody tells you, because I've had cases where an individual have said, I am this age, and the reality of it is that he or she was not. So individuals can get fake IDs, and they can use these IDs for whatever reason it is. It can get alcohol, maybe to get into a club for, individuals over the age of 21. They could be drinking or just to impress you. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you are now looking at 20 years in prison because somebody lied to you and you believe it. You don't want to even take the word of people that's supposed to be friends or family. My best guess is just leave them alone, find somebody else in your own category or someone that's actually in your class. And then try to verify the age as well, because again, there are some people that are dishonest, because the reality of it is, as I said before, someone that you really care a great deal about, and maybe they care a great deal about you and they lied about their age, and now you're looking at prison time because of that. The third thing, if you find yourself being charged with statutory rape, or if you think that's a possibility, the most important thing that I can tell you is to keep your mouth shut. Don't talk to anybody about this at all. The police may come and they ask you questions. As I've talked to all my clients and anyone that actually came to my office for a consultation, my advice to them 100% every single time is to demand an attorney. You have nothing to say, because anything and everything that you say can and will be used against you in court. And trust me, having handled these cases for nearly 15 years, I have had more clients that have buried themselves because of their mouth than anything else. So shut up. It is rough to say that, it's hard to say it, it's cruel, it's direct, it's in your face. But if nothing else that you ever hear from this video is to keep your mouth closed if you think or you have been accused of statutory rape. My motto is, if you're going to be accused of something, let the state prove it. Don't help them, because they got enough help already. They have the alleged victim, they may have statements, maybe there's cameras, whatever it is, you don't need to help with that situation. So keep closed. The next thing is to get an attorney as soon as possible. So in some cases, what may happen is that the police or a detective or some way may call and say, hey, I need you to come down to the station, make a statement. We just want to know what's happening. Listen, we want to respect the police officer and we want to cooperate. But if you have any inkling that you could potentially be a suspect, get an attorney and have your attorney to go to the station with you. Do not make a statement. It is a mistake. There's something called Miranda rights. Most people pretend they know what rights are. Most people have no idea. Now, with Miranda rights, it says you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, one can be appointed to you. Now, these things are basic stuff the average person knows. And my understanding is that this stuff has even been taught in school. The problem is that most people don't exercise this right. It says you have a right to remain silent. In a nutshell, use the right and shut up. It will bury you every single time. This is not the time to prove your case, to have your moment in court, or there's a saying, the truth will set you free. No, sir, no, ma'am. In this case, what you deem to be the truth will put you behind bars. Third thing is stay away from the alleged victim. So I've had cases where the alleged victim says she's raped, she's hurt, she's assaulted, all this stuff has happened. And I've advised my clients to stay away from them. But what ended up happening is that the individual, the alleged victim, is making contact with them, either on social media or texting or phone calls. You don't do that. Stay away from them, because it is because of your relationship with that individual, you could be looking at prison time. So you want to cut all ties from that, no matter how much love or emotion or whatever it is that you have with them, cut all ties until the issue or the matter is settled. I hope the information provided today has been helpful to you. I hope you have learned something from it. And I really, 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 really hope that this will prevent another young person having to come into either my office or another attorney's office because they are frightened about what could possibly be a charge of statutory rape, and again, looking at the possibility of prison time. Well, this brings us to the end of our episode. I hope you were inspired and you learned something new and helpful. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more topics like this, please let us know by leaving a comment, hitting the like button, sharing this episode with other men and fathers, and subscribing to our channel. Also, to hear the full episode of Statutory Rape, please check out our podcast, The Father's Advocate, wherever you listen to podcasts. As always, you are not in this alone. Until then, this is your Father's Advocate, Attorney Hughes.